So I don't know if any of you are aware of a survey that was taken within the last year, and they surveyed residents of the DC metro area, and they asked them, what is our greatest challenge? Do you know what most people said? It wasn't terrorism, it wasn't crime, it wasn't the economy, it wasn't jobs, it wasn't crumbling infrastructure, but it was transportation. I'm curious in the audience, how many of you would agree, is transportation our greatest challenge in the DC metro area?
Yeah.
Okay, a little fewer than in the survey.
All right.
What do you say? And I'll start with you, Jeff. How do you reassure those people, at least in the survey, who said that's our biggest challenge? What are we doing to fix it?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. DC is thriving. We are adding upwards of 1,000 residents per month to the city. And so we are thinking through ways as we're rebuilding and renovating and modernizing our infrastructure. We're also rethinking the way that we use that infrastructure in order to move people not just more efficiently, but also in a safer environment. And so we are exploring a number of different technologies, a number of different creative systems where we're rethinking, for example, how we use our curbside space to accommodate the rising need of ride-sharing vehicles, for example. We recently launched a pilot program in one of our overnight, late-night districts where we've repurposed parking spaces for the purpose of pickup and drop-off for ride-sharing vehicles. So we're thinking creatively about how to work within what we've got. DC is not a place where we can add more lanes. We can't build highways, so we have to work with the capacity that we have.
Well, are toll lanes a possibility? I mean, they're having interesting results on I-66 right now.
We're watching very closely. We're watching closely what's happening in Virginia.
Yeah. And?
Yeah. I think it's early to tell. Certainly, the news this week has been interesting. But again, we don't have the luxury of adding to our infrastructure in the way that some of our surrounding states do. So we've got to really think creatively about how to work within what we've got.
Could tolls like that, though? I mean, or the failure potentially of them on a major route like 66 push people to mass transit? I mean, you'd like that, right?
Certainly, we're always looking for ways to reduce single occupancy vehicles and encourage and incentivize the use of transit systems.
Pete, let's talk about Maryland. I know you're very big on public-private partnerships. And the governor's $9 billion traffic relief plan is going to rely really heavily on that. Talk to us about that, how that's coming, and if folks aren't aware of that, that's adding lanes to 270, to the Beltway, and to the BW Parkway. So are you finding your partners?
Well, Maryland has a secret, and that's that we have a congestion problem. And,
really? No.
Yeah, and frankly, we haven't been willing to say that we have a congestion problem. But it's so obvious, and it is impacting economic development. There are companies who simply won't come here because of the difficulty of getting around. And so, we have the issues of safety, we have the issues of the congestion, which is quality of life. I mean, people, the impact that's estimated for the capital region right now is annually congestion is costing $2.05 billion a year.
And are we the worst in the country? Because I see us move around, sometimes number one, number two.
Yes, we managed to displace Los Angeles as having the worst congestion. So it's my greatest achievement so far as we managed to get to number one. But so, yes.
Race to the bottom.
Public-private partnerships, I believe, offer some real opportunities for us. Because quite honestly, we don't have $9 billion to invest in dealing with the congestion along the Washington Beltway 270, which is actually the most traffic travels on 270, even more than the Beltway, and then also 295. We drove down today on 295, and it only took us an hour and 10 minutes to get 23 miles. So
But then you got to D.C.
And then we got to D.C., and it was great, just flowed. The approach is that we need capacity. We can't afford to provide it ourselves. And so express toll lanes offer an option. And certainly the news on I-66 right now, in general, doesn't help us. But the reality is, if you don't want to pay it, you stay in the same lanes you were driving in previously.
No one's forcing it.
And if the concessionaire is charging too much, then they won't have the traffic, and it's the marketplace. What will it bear? And so if the price is more than people are willing to pay, they either lose their business or they go in. So we are moving very quickly on the acquisition of concessionaires, and we are now in the process of hiring our legal advisors, financial advisors, and we will very shortly be going out for our general engineering consultants. We hope to have, just the last fact is, we hope to have a draft request for proposals out next summer.
Jeff, what about the LaHood report? Former Transportation Secretary Ray LaHood put out a study looking at Metro, and he found that DC, Maryland, Virginia, and the federal government need to, for it to be a success, provide a constant funding stream. And he said $540 million more a year. I mean, is that possible?
You know, I think right now, one of our biggest priorities as a region is, of course, rebuilding the safety and reliability of the metro system, rebuilding people's confidence in that system. I think the general manager, Paul Wiedefeld, has been doing a really incredible job of taking those steps. And the one thing that we all agree on, we're not all in agreement yet on how to get there, but I'm optimistic and encouraged that we all agree that the issue really to be focused on right now is funding. And so there are a lot of very smart people that are looking at considering different ways to get us there, but fundamentally, that is the best way for us really to ensure the preservation of the system is to ensure that we have a steady source of funding. The district has been clear about how we think we should get there, but
federal government, right? The mayor's asked for more from the federal government.
I think the federal government, no matter what we do, has to continue to be an important piece of that. But the conversation is encouraging. We're not there yet, but I'm optimistic that we're going to get there.
Pete, will Maryland kick in more?
So the governor's proposed here over the last several months was that each of the four partners in WMATA, meaning the three jurisdictions and the federal government, would each put in an additional $125 million a year. That would raise $500 million, and to do that for 4 years. And during that 4-year period, there would be much more examination of what the real needs are rather than just simply picking some amount and extrapolating it out into the future. So we believe there needs to be a closer look at what's driving these costs, and the governor's committed. But I think it's very important to understand, he's saying all the partners have to come to the table, because right now 40% of the ridership on WMATA are federal employees. And
so the federal government derives a clear benefit.
They do, and the total amount, including the $150 million in PREA funding that was for a 10-year period, $466 million is what the federal government is putting in right now. This year, Maryland will put in $501 million. So the federal government needs to be a full partner at the table, funding the benefits that it clearly receives.
Jeff, I'd like to talk about this study that was reported recently, just this week, from the University of California at Davis, taking a look at what a lot of people are increasingly using now, and that's these ride-sharing services, the Ubers and the Lyfts. And I was surprised by what they found, that it's actually taking people off of mass transit around the country, putting them in cars, and worsening congestion. I mean, what do you do about that?
I think, Kathleen, in the ideal scenario, ride-sharing is a complement to our existing transit infrastructure, and that's.
But right now, it's cheaper and it's faster than your existing mass transit infrastructure.
There are a number of different studies and ideas out there. I think fundamentally, our goal, certainly as a city transportation agency and as a region, is to incentivize to the greatest extent possible the use of ride-sharing to get people to and from existing transit infrastructure. A huge part of that is rebuilding people's confidence in that transit infrastructure and in those systems. But what we know is that part of the equation, too, for us is knowing the volume and the use of ride-sharing. How are we adjusting our own infrastructure? How are we thinking through our current systems? And on the one hand, the value and the benefit is that if people are making the choice not to purchase or to lease a car because they know that they have ride-sharing as an option, we look at that as a step in the right direction. Now we have to figure out how to incorporate those vehicles into the system so that it doesn't get to what you're suggesting, which is increased congestion. So there are a number of different strategies. There's not one magic solution, but it moves us closer in the direction of getting folks to use transit.
How are you doing, though, at getting the riders back? I mean, you've lost 135,000 daily riders.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
You know, just a couple weeks ago, Metro WMATA released its vital signs report, which shows that the steps that are being taken are heading us in that direction. We know that there's not going to be an overnight solution that fixes all of the problems, but
so how far are you going in that direction? What do you have numbers?
Sure. I think I think that just from the Safe Track program that that General Manager Wiedefeld has been focused on, what we've seen is that more folks are not only going back to Metro, but thankfully heading in the direction of people using it for the first time or going to it as an alternative to purchasing a car. And so I think that's those kinds of steps. We're not close to being there where we need to be, but we're getting there, and I think that that's what's most encouraging.
Pete, what do you think in Chicago, what they've done to try to at least benefit from this new trend of the Ubers and the Lyfts, is they've put a 15-cent surcharge on every ride-sharing ride, and that's going directly to repairing public transportation infrastructure. Could we do that in Maryland, D.C.?
Well, I first need to say that Governor Hogan supports no increases of fees or taxes, so that wouldn't be very likely to happen in Maryland.
What if we need them?
But what I would say was, I don't think 15 cents a ride is going to produce nearly enough. It's just, you know, it's very discouraging when you ask your staff to say, show me what we could do with $1 billion, and put it on a map. And they bring in a map of the state, and there's this little green dot. And I mean, transportation is so expensive. So the idea, you know, as we are looking at work on the Beltway, our estimated costs are about $110 million per lane mile. So these are just phenomenal numbers. Again, and I know that you're referring to transit, but even the transit costs are so high that, you know, I'd say that 15-cent surcharge is, it might be a way to state a philosophy, but I don't think that's going to be the solution as to what we're going to have to do.
Jeff, I'd like to talk bridges. The American Society of Civil Engineers says that around the country we have 56,000 bridges that are structurally deficient, and several of them right here in our nation's capital. What can you say to reassure those folks who drive across those bridges every day? And how are we coming with a Frederick Douglass bridge replacement?
So in the district, over the past 5 years, we have reduced the number of structurally deficient bridges from 20 down to 5. And they're either planning or in the middle of construction now on those remaining. So we have a good story to tell there. One of those is the Frederick Douglass Memorial Bridge, which is our largest capital project ever that is about to commence. And I think part of what's encouraging there is that we're not just replacing a piece of aging infrastructure, we're modernizing it and making sure that it's set to meet the needs of the future of mobility. And so I think that's a really important piece of this, that we're thinking through what the next 50 years are going to look like and what the future needs of the residents, of the visitors, of commuters who utilize that system every day might be.
Will that have an impact on congestion? Pete, go ahead.
I'd like to add, when we talk about structurally deficient bridges, that does not mean that they are unsafe. I can assure you, any Department of Transportation in this country would not allow the public to travel over a bridge that they knew was unsafe. It will be closed before it reaches that point. And frankly, the very high safety numbers that you see are punctuated by very infrequent bridge issues. Is a testimony to what we do every day. And so no DOT would allow people. But if you want to know which is a structurally deficient bridge, right, look for a weight posting on it. If you see a sign to the side that says weight limited 25,000 pounds, or whatever that number is, that's telling you that is a structurally deficient bridge.
And then you should, excuse me, change your commuting route to avoid the bridge.
No, it doesn't.
What's your choice,
yes.
Really?
No, you don't. It's honestly that the bridge is safe, but the idea is you don't want super loads going over the top of that bridge. So it's again, and when bridge engineers, who are absolutely the most conservative, frustrating people I've ever dealt with, when they do an estimate of what a bridge can take, they are making so many they're making so many decisions that continue to move it into the extraordinary conservative column.
Let's talk about Vision Zero. How's the city doing with that? And for folks who don't know, this is your effort, and it's been replicated in cities around the country and I guess the world to take traffic fatalities to zero and serious injuries to zero.
Yeah, Vision Zero is a part of the fabric of everything that we do as an agency, and there are really three components to it. The first is that we're looking really systematically at some of the most dangerous intersections throughout the city, those that have a high incidence of crashes, and we're using technology to monitor those intersections to determine which are really in the worst shape and what the acute problems are that we could go in and fix. An equally as important component of that is of course, enforcement of the current laws that will keep people safe. And of course, public education, letting folks know, especially folks who are coming in using the system maybe for the first time, letting them know what the rules are, what our signage means, changing the way that we prioritize and look at signals, changing the infrastructure to make safer facilities for bicyclists, doing a number of things really to create not just safer intersections, but a safer network across the entire city. And that's something that we think about and talk about every hour of every day at DDOT is how are we ensuring that all of our projects, our major capital projects, how are we ensuring that we're making those facilities as safe as possible?
And how are you doing with that?
You know, our goal is to get to 2024 and reduce serious injuries and fatalities down to zero. And it's a constant battle. It's every day thinking about doing something differently. It's learning from other cities, from our partners in surrounding jurisdictions about what we could be doing differently and better. And so that's something that I'm optimistic about, but it's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's a daily battle for us.
Before we go to audience questions, Pete, I wanted to ask you about Elon Musk's Hyperloop Tunnel. I mean,
yes.
Maryland has signed on to this, but not many other
we could
areas
talk about this for an hour.
I mean, putting people in pods and zipping them through tunnels powered by magnets and.
You know, I have to tell you, I'm a believer.
Okay.
Right, I'm a believer.
This isn't science fiction.
It is not science
Okay.
fiction. This entire system is based on current technologies. There has to be no leap in technology to make this work. And the idea is that you would have a concrete tube and that you would have the atmosphere evacuated for most of it. You would be in a pod, and that this pod would be propelled in an extremely efficient way because there's no air resistance.
No resistance, right.
And their goal is that to start is to get from DC to Baltimore, but they're absolutely looking at going to New York. And from
How quickly DC to Baltimore?
And how quickly will this all happen?
The route, yeah. I mean,
Yes.
in what, 20 minutes?
Well,
Less?
at top speed, right? At top speed, which it couldn't go all the way. It's DC to New York in 29 minutes.
Whoa!
Yes,
That's incredible,
isn't it? It's amazing. And I have to tell you, so I've been working with the head of their project, and it's I love how Elon Musk does things. So it's called the Boring Company. So I love this double entendre of the Boring Company, but it's actually their tunneling operation. A gentleman from SpaceX is leading this, and so I told him, I said, I want to be on the first one that goes.
Really?
Yeah, and that's what he said. He said, really?
Yeah. Yeah.
But this is it's absolutely real, and it's all based upon speed. Will be based upon how straight and level the tunnel can be placed. But again, their top speed, which isn't only just theoretical, but they estimate their top speed in this for if it's straight enough, long enough, would be 760 miles an hour, which is faster than you can travel in a jet.
That's incredible. Well, I'd like to go to the audience now, and if you would, when you ask your question, stand up, identify yourself, and direct the question to either Jeff or Pete. Do we have a hand right here?
My name is Justin Brown. I'm with National Journal. I actually grew up in Maryland and recently moved into DC. And my question is to Pete. I know you were talking about Hyperloop and how fascinating that is. And I know there was also a consideration for maglev, like another type of technology that would move people from DC to Baltimore. However, I know there's been a lot of community unrest within all the suburban communities, mainly because it's just linking downtown DC to downtown Baltimore. So can you kind of explain what you're doing to help people in those suburban communities understand the benefits so that they're not kind of like a stalwart to the fact that most of the benefits are going to the cities.
And because aren't their lives going to be impacted by this construction too? So they would have costs but no benefits.
For maglev, I understand that roughly 60% of the maglev placement would be tunneled. Right. For the Hyperloop, it's 100% tunnel, and their goal is they're just using state right-of-ways, so they only have to deal with one property owner in order to get back and forth. The Hyperloop plan, as it's, and I've got to be very careful. I can't speak for SpaceX or Elon Musk or anyone, so I can't speak for them. But their plan is that it can be much more local, and that it can have additional stops for relatively inexpensive costs to be able to add more locations. So I think you would find, from the standpoint of being able to support more communities and more activities, I think the Musk model is very interesting.
We have a question in the front right here. Okay.
Yeah, John Wetmore with pedestrians.org. In recent years, pedestrian fatalities have been up nationwide and in Maryland. What infrastructure investments can be made that would make walking in Maryland safe, comfortable, and convenient?
You know, pedestrian fatalities make up about 20% of our highway fatalities. Pedestrians, 20%. It amazes me. Last year.
Is that in Maryland or U.S. entirely?
No, I mean Maryland is. We have 112 pedestrian fatalities. There are, and the problem is it's not necessarily where you would think, right? So it's someone gets out of their vehicle to change a tire, and when they're struck, that's a pedestrian. But we do know that we can put more facilities in, using Hawk systems and others to make drivers aware that there are pedestrians. And we've installed a very successful crossing in Ocean City as a demonstration of what we can do. We're working with some of the neighborhoods here in the DC area to install more equipment, again, to make sure drivers know there's pedestrians. So it's actually both sides of the equation that have to be more attentive. Pedestrians have to be more attentive, and drivers need to be more attentive. We have specific programs that are designed to, get that message to pedestrians. But I absolutely agree with you. It is a problem, and we know we need to do more.
We have a question back here, and then we'll have one up here.
Good morning. I just want to bring it back to WMATA and Metro. Both Congressman Delaney, a Democrat in Maryland, and Congresswoman Comstock, Republican in Virginia, introduced bills that would increase the federal funding level if WMATA and would be allowed to have more concessions or more negotiation power with the ATU. So we've talked a lot about P3s and whatnot. So basically allowing WMATA to have allowed to use them, more private contractors, private companies, et cetera. So I'm just curious your standpoints on those bills.
Next question.
I haven't read those proposals, so I can't really to speak to them.
Pete?
The costs, while the report says that these costs are in line with other large urban center transit systems, that still doesn't mean that those costs, in my opinion, are reasonable. And I believe there's got to be more latitude in working with ATU. I have to work with ATU as well in Maryland with our Maryland Transit Administration. I think the solution for WMATA is not going to be any one silver bullet. I think there's multifaceted problems. We need multifaceted solutions.
All right, let's go briefly to our last question.
Thank you.
Short.
My question for Pete is in two parts. It's all about 270. I live on the other end of the 270 in New Brunswick, and I heard on the radio like you got approval or budget to add 4 lanes, and inviting the citizen for ideas. My suggestion is, why don't we think about the multi-level, to these 4 lane will be express lane, but instead of just widening and take a property, or I'm not sure how complex that. 270 is a great example. You have a middle island, you can have column,
Well, let's take that question because we're running out of time. Just briefly. What do you think? Is it possible?
Very quickly, yes. So 270 has the highest volume traffic of any roadway in the state of Maryland. It's huge. We've done two things. First, we've done the innovative congestion relief procurement, in which we said, you stand on the Beltway, look north, you have $100 million. Whoever can move the most vehicles the farthest, the fastest, gets the $100 million to implement. That's already been awarded. Our modeling says that Frederick to the Beltway time can be reduced by 30 minutes. So that's huge. The last issue, and I know we're out of time, is that the issue about why we don't elevate. And generally, we've gone from the NIMBY, right, to banana. And so banana is build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. And so people, resist having their view shed impacted by vertical roadways. So we are going to be looking at all solutions that have the minimum impact on surrounding properties and people's lives, but we know we've got to come up with solutions.
All right, and on that banana note, please thank Pete, Jeff, and we'll move on to the next panel. Thank you all.